Well, unless you have literally been living under a rock or been in a coma for the last couple of weeks, you have been unable to hide away from the news and the controversy surrounding Anheuser-Busch in Bud Light, surrounding Dylan Mulvaney and everything that has went on with that. And it brings forward the question, if you're the executive at Bud Light who had this great idea, the girl who said, our beer's too fratty, we need to make it more for whoever else, how out of touch do you have to be? Well, joining us this morning is Mike Viola. He's got a column over at townhall.com. And Mike, you're indicating that some of these unbelievably out of touch moments might become the norm. Good morning to you.
Hey, Nick. Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about it. What are you currently seeing in the political landscape, and why do you think some of this stuff is going to continue?
Well, we've seen a trend in recent years of companies taking strange, you could say, this diversity world moves for reasons that might not seem terribly obvious to the general public, right? I mean, 0.5% of the general public is trans, and most of those trans people probably don't care who's drinking their beer, but they thought to pursue, a very specific and potentially alienating play for the trans community with Bud Light. A lot of this is driven by the fact that companies are concerned with diversity, equity, and inclusion indexes put out by groups to sort of rank companies as to how they prioritize those factors. Now, when you hear those factors, they don't really mean diversity, equity, and inclusion. They mean just progressive politics. Now, downstream from that diversity, equity, and inclusion score oftentimes plays into factors that investment firms use. So ultimately, companies think that they need to play up diversity for the sake of their stock price.
Well, and I guess it makes sense, Mike, when you look at if you don't do that, you're going to have some crazy woke leftist mob that's coming for you on social media. And we know how these companies are really, really terrible at holding the line on anything. I guess they're hedging their bets and hoping that they can skirt away and get away from this. But in the meantime, they end up alienating all the people that use their actual products.
That's right. I think these people have confused social media. They see huge reach numbers there. To these people, maybe, our ad campaign reached 10 million people on TikTok. To them, they think that that's a lot, because a lot of the people making these decisions don't really have hard skills because our schools don't teach them well anymore. So as an alternative, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or things like the ESG investment framework, that's environmental social governance, is a lot easier than just doing the hard analytical work to figure out who you're actually reaching and how to hit your target audience where your sales really come from.
You said something interesting earlier, and I hadn't really thought about the number that way. You said that 0.5% of the population self-identifies as trans, yet Bud Light is making made a big deal about that. You're looking at such a small margin of people, and inside of that 0.5%, such a small margin of people that are likely drinking Bud Light anyway. It really does make you wonder, Mike, what exactly is going on in these conversations? How nobody is standing up and saying, maybe we shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah, and if you've heard any of the public statements from that Anheuser-Busch executive behind the campaign, Alyssa Heinerscheid, who I believe was let go 5 or so days ago, it sounds like traditional marketing factors like audience and sales and how to reach this traditional group didn't really matter to her. It was more, in her words, an idea to make the brand lighter and brighter and different, which, if you want to go lighter than Bud Light, just launch a new beer. I don't know what to tell you, right? Launch a beer for Dylan Mulvaney fans, but sacrificing an existing brand that had the biggest market share of any beer in America seems like a strange move to appease such a small audience.
I didn't realize they had the biggest market share. I mean, that makes this whole situation even worse. What a disaster. And this is people are like, oh, this is happening more and more. I mean, I think we have to go back a couple of years, Mike, it seems like to me, I remember Gillette being one of the big first ones that fell into this. They did a campaign a couple of years ago. Traditionally, men are the ones buying razors and shaving cream from Gillette, the best a man can get. And they found themselves embattled in a similar controversy. This is not necessarily a new thing. It just seems like more and more companies are falling into this woke leftist trap.
That's right. I remember that Gillette ad. I believe it was Super Bowl, maybe 2019, that it came out. And that's hard to read because, again, well, men are buying razors. So who exactly was this appealing to? And I don't have anything on sales numbers if that, impacted sales. But fortunately, in the Bud Light case, we very much know that it hurt their stock price for a while. April 1st was, I think, the first day of trading where that happened. So it's pretty easy to see from the start of the controversy how their stock really tanked and has since recovered, actually, since letting that executive let go. So, I think hopefully they've learned their lesson in a way that maybe wasn't terribly obvious in previous cases. But if you're going to stuff a social agenda down your existing audience's throat, they will indeed react. And just because something is doing well on a niche social media network like TikTok, it doesn't mean it's going to play well with your real customers.
Yes, and that's the key word there, the real customers. And when you look at the Bud Light situation, we could talk about their market cap and all that stuff with their stock price. The one thing that is the real shame here, at least to me, Mike, is you've got all of these regional and small beer distributors all across the United States. You've got bars and restaurants that is traditionally a pretty low margin industry, depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it, that are now sitting on all of this Bud Light because nobody's drinking it. This is only screwing local mom and pop businesses all across the country.
Yeah, and that has been the response from a lot of bar owners. A lot of places have done pretty good coverage of it. FoxNews.com has written a number of articles about people not able to sell Bud Light, their stock of Bud Light that they already have because of this. I mean, maybe that's changed since the firing, but I think there's going to be, people are going to remember the controversy much more than their subsequent apologies for the controversy. I think, unfortunately, they've probably tarnished this brand. I don't know that that's going to have a huge long-term impact, but their rebranding effort certainly backfired.
Yeah, it absolutely did. And it will recover. It always does. And one thing that conservatives don't do very well, and I can admit this as I'll self-identify as one this morning, we're just not very good at boycotts. We're outraged for a couple of weeks and then, head out to a bar tonight and we'll be like, oh yeah, let's get a couple of Bud Lights and then move on with our lives. We're not always the best at holding the line there on the boycotts. You mentioned a term earlier that I want to dive into a little bit because, beer is one thing, and we can talk about what beer and shaving companies do, and all that stuff is fine and dandy. But this ESG, this environmental social governance, this has got some big concern. This has some serious risks on folks' retirements and everything else. What are you hearing about ESG?
ESG, which stands for Environmental Social Governance Investing, has become a big movement within the asset management industry, the people running the funds in your 401k, et cetera. It's the idea that those environmental social governance factors should be treated as risk factors that you need to should consider in addition to, say, balance sheet, et cetera, when making an investment. Now, I think it should go without saying that governance should be considered, so I don't know why you need this new investment format. And even occasionally there may be environmental risks you want to think about. But that social component of it is really, pretty sketchy. It seems in practice to basically equate to asset managers are afraid that not taking progressive social positions on major cultural issues is a risk. Oftentimes that is where people are considering factors like diversity and inclusion. That's where they're considering things like, ratios of women and non-white people on boards, etc. The problem with that, I think a lot like what I mentioned earlier with this marketing campaign at Bud Light. The problem with that is there's no real basis that it actually affects returns. But again, I think in a world where we're moving away from solid, foundations and the quantitative methods where people are investing, that becomes an easy way for people to make decisions. The more that people engage in ESG, the more types of situations like at Bud Light will happen, because people think that that is a smart business decision when it is in fact not. Hopefully, events like the Bud Light scenario will change minds, but I still think on the back end, a lot of people are thinking about ESG concerns when they do these sorts of things, and oftentimes they're not getting the message from consumers fast enough.
Mike Viola is our guest this morning. He has a column out at townhall.com. Expect more out-of-touch moments if ESG proliferates, and specifically in regards to 401ks and Roths and money management. You've got these big leftist money managers that instead of investing in something like gas or oil that might have a 15% ROI, they're going after some new clean form of energy that might have a 2% return on investment. And to me, Mike, that's completely against the purpose of being a money manager. The goal is to get the best return on investment for your customers, not play games with politics. I mean, this is insanity.
Absolutely. I would actually say, you call them leftist money managers. I don't even think it's that. I think they're more cowardly money managers. I think they're afraid of how the public perceives their products, and it tends to be the left that they're more afraid of than the right. There's been other promising developments beyond this little scandal at Bud Light. A lot of red states have declared that they will not consider, they call them non-pecuniary factors, that is factors that don't actually affect risk or return in their state pension plans. And for most of them, that meant excluding ESG considerations, because despite the claims of ESG, it does not actually impact returns, and it does not usually consider financially relevant factors. So there's progress being made, but I think we will prevail, but it's going to be a long road.
Yeah, the idea that you would look at any other details besides the economic details when you're talking about managing money or investing in anything is to me, seems like something out of a clown world, but I guess that is what we're living in right now. Mike Viola, our guest this morning. Mike, you're over at Young Voices. Tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, Young Voices is a great organization. Basically, we bring in young, policy-minded people, try to focus on individual issues rather than partisan politics. You can find us at young-voices.org, where you can find a lot of Young Voices advocates. We're just putting out, focusing on teaching young people to learn to write and argue convincingly to make the case for liberty.
Mike, thank you so much for the time this morning. Great column, and hopefully we can catch up with you again soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nick.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Mike Viola joining us this morning. If you want to check out his column, it's over at townhall.com. We'll put it up on our social media profiles. Expect more out-of-touch moments if ESG proliferates. More Wilmington's Morning News coming up.